Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back into the mud-soaked alleys and flickering firelit halls of the Middle Ages. The candles drip, the bread is stale, and somewhere a baby is crying not because it's hungry, but because someone just told it it's a girl. You're about to be born into a world where your entire value is calculated before you take your first step. And spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You arrive wailing, tiny fists clenched, and the midwife doesn't even need to look twice. The silence in the room says it all. You're a girl. No church bells, no feast. Just your mother sighing relief perhaps that you're breathing, but maybe a touch of dread too, because she knows what's ahead. Your name isn't your own, of course. It might be Agnes or Isolde or Matilda, something saintly and strong. But no one asks if you like it. They just press oil to your forehead, murmur Latin words, and now you're marked, both baptized and claimed by a world that sees you as future property. Even before your hair grows past your ears, people start doing math. How much land could your marriage secure? What kind of dowry can be scraped together by the time you're 12? Will your hips be wide enough? That's right, hips. You're already being sized up like a prize cow at market, and you're still learning to hold your spoon. The truth is, childhood as you'd imagine it, lazy days, tree climbing, scraped knees, and wild imagination is a luxury reserved for boys. Your toys? Wooden dolls if you're lucky, but mostly brooms. While your brothers chase frogs in the creek, you learn to carry water without spilling a drop. And if you spill it, that's a switch to the legs, not a gentle laugh. Some days you help mother wash clothes in icy river water until your fingers go numb. Other days you spin wool until your fingertips bleed. Your job isn't to play, it's to become useful. And you will because you have no choice. Your father might look at you with pride, sure, but only when you serve silently or mimic your mother's movements without fuss. Disobedience gets punished fast, maybe a smack, maybe just your dinner withheld. Either way, you learn early. Good girls are quiet, invisible, and endlessly helpful. What about reading, writing, education? Well, if you're noble, you might be taught to read religious texts, but only so you can better confess your sins. If you're peasant stock, don't bother. Letters are for monks and men. Your hands are made for kneading, scrubbing, and eventually catching babies your own or someone else's. Here's a charming historical tidbit. Some medieval households kept a tally stick of their daughters' chores, like a scorecard. Miss a task, and your tally goes down. A well-behaved girl might get a dried plum. A poorly behaved one might get married off faster, just to be someone else's problem. Historians still argue whether medieval people truly loved their children the way modern parents do. Some records suggest deep affection and grief when children died, which was often. Others imply that emotional distance was a coping strategy. After all, with a 50% child mortality rate, bonding too closely might have felt dangerous. Though you live, you grow, your hair thickens, your legs lengthen. At 10, you carry your baby brother on one hip while skimming fat off boiling stew with the other hand. You're praised not for your cleverness or dreams, but for your quiet diligence. You know how to sew a hem, scrub a pot, and pluck lice from a toddler's scalp. And here's the real kicker. Despite all this training, you're still seen as a liability. A financial burden? Why? Because soon you'll need a dowry linen, chickens, a bit of land if your family's lucky. This isn't a romantic notion of providing for your future. This is a transaction in the making. You're not just a daughter, you're an investment. Around you, other girls disappear into marriages. You hear whispers of older husbands, of bleeding bedsheets, of babies born too early, and mothers buried too soon. But no one explains. You're told to obey, to prepare, to pray. Understanding is optional, submission is not. And you begin to notice something else. The women around you are tired, not just physically, though their backs ache and hands are raw, but soul-deep tired. They look out windows, not for inspiration, but for a moment to breathe. For 2 minutes, without someone calling their name. One fringe belief floating around at the time, that girls born under the astrological sign of Virgo would grow to be better wives, cleaner, calmer, more fertile. Some parents timed their baby-making with the stars, hoping to produce the ideal bride. Yes, your fate could be sealed by the constellations. You lie in bed at night, straw poking your ribs, a wool blanket itching your neck. You stare at the ceiling and wonder, briefly, what it would be like to live differently. Maybe as a boy, maybe as a bird, anything but what you, area girl, growing up in a world that already knows exactly what it expects from you, down to the hour of your first childbirth. But no one asks what you want, no one ever will. Morning comes early when you're a medieval girl, and it never comes gently. The rooster might crow, but your true alarm is the clatter of pots and your mother's stern voice calling your name like a summons to court. You blink away sleep and sit up on your straw mattress, blanket heavy with last night's smoke and sweat, and know that another long day awaits. You're not yet a woman by anyone's measure, but you stopped being a child the moment you could walk without falling over. Maybe around age 4, you were given your first baby, not a doll, but your actual younger sibling. You learned to hold them, hush them, rock them, clean them. Now by 6 or 7, you're an expert caretaker. Not that you had a choice. Your chores start before your body fully wakes. You fetch water from the well, balancing the bucket carefully so you don't slosh it, because if you spill even a little, it means another trip. The handle bites into your red fingers, cold and calloused far earlier than they should be. Inside, there's bread to knead, fires to stoke, floors to sweep, goats to milk. You do all this before most modern children even find their left shoe. There's no morning cartoons, no pancakes with syrup, no time to be anything but useful. You're a cog in the family machine, and the moment you stop turning, the whole system falters. If your family is poor, and most are, you might be working in the fields by 8. Not helping like a cute Instagram farm post, you're actually working, pulling weeds, picking stones, scattering feed. And if you complain, your father reminds you that idle hands breed sin, and your mother just sighs like she's heard it all before, which she has. Some days are special. Laundry day, that means lugging armfuls of clothing to the nearest river, regardless of the weather. Freezing rain, bundle up, no gloves, use your knuckles. You scrub the garments against smooth stones, then wring them out till your wrists ache. The river stings your skin, and you half expect it to turn red from the cold. But this is the routine. You don't question it. What about education? Unless you're born to nobility, and even then, only sometimes school is a far-off fantasy. Boys might learn Latin, law, or theology. You learn how to stretch a meal out of turnips, and why it's important to boil linens after a birth. Your textbooks are your mother's hands and your grandmother's curses muttered under her breath. One mainstream historical fact. In some towns, noble girls were taught just enough to read a prayer book and sign their names. That's it. Just enough literacy to repent, never to rebel. But there's always the fringe stuff too. In parts of rural England, some families taught daughters to sing healing songs passed down like recipes. These weren't formal lessons, but half-sung, half-whispered things that supposedly cured colic, warded off wolves, or kept your teeth from falling out too early. The church hated them. Naturally, that made them more fun to learn. Back in your cottage, every corner of the home has its lesson. You learn how to judge the age of an egg by placing it in water. You learn how to tell the time by the angle of sunlight through the rafters. You even learn how to hide a bruised arm under a sleeve if a brother or drunk father gets too rough, and how not to flinch when someone lifts their voice. Your doll, if you still have one, is made of rags. She's dirty, she's got one arm. You talk to her at night, quietly, and sometimes imagine she talks back, but not in your real voice. Oh no, that would be dangerous. You do it inside your head, just in case someone thinks you're too odd, too dreamy. Girls like that end up in trouble. There's no room to be soft, even if your nature leans that way. You toughen up early. Maybe you stop crying when your toe gets smashed. Maybe you hold back tears when a neighbor boy throws mud at your skirt and laughs. You learn to shrug it off because your mother always says, better they throw mud than something else. And if you get too rowdy, if you speak out of turn, or you don't show the proper modesty, the correction is swift. Sometimes it's a wooden spoon. Sometimes it's just silence, a cold withdrawal that chills you deeper than the river ever could. You learn fast. Compliance is survival. Historians still argue whether medieval girls had space for joy moments of laughter, of games of simple childhood. Some chronicles describe girls playing with hoops or skipping stones, but those were likely stolen moments, squeezed in between the work. Joy wasn't a right, it was a luxury. And luxuries, as you know, rarely last. By 10, you've probably seen a dead body, maybe a child who didn't survive winter, maybe an elder whose breath rattled out while you were sweeping nearby. Death isn't a mystery to you. It's not even that scary. It's just part of things. If your parents are strict, they've already begun preparing you for your future. You learn how to carry yourself, not just physically, but socially. Lower your eyes around men, speak softly, walk like you're smaller than you are. These aren't written rules, but they're drilled into you so thoroughly that even your shadow seems obedient. Your clothes, nothing fancy. A smock, a belt, maybe a hood, if you're lucky. Everything itches, everything smells like smoke and sweat. If you're poor, you might share your garments with a sister trading off who gets the nicer shift on feast days. You don't complain. What would be the point? Even menstruation, when it comes, isn't really explained. You might be handed rags and told to stay clean. No one talks about cramps or moods or the way your body suddenly doesn't feel like yours. And if you do ask, you'll get a warning. Be careful now. The men will notice. That's your rite of passage, not a celebration, a caution. And so your days continue. Work, serve, obey, sleep, repeat. You watch the world through smoke and wood slats, and the narrow margins allowed to you. You might be 10, you might be 12, but inside, you already feel ancient. You're still not a woman, not quite. But that doesn't matter to the adults making plans behind closed doors while you stir porridge over the hearth. You catch whispers, your name paired with a boy's, maybe a man's. A name you've only heard in passing. He might be 15, he might be 30. Either way, your fate is quietly being signed, sealed, and soon to be delivered. You're betrothed, just like that. No candlelit confessions, no blushing courtship with flowers and poetry. One day, your mother tells you to wear the cleaner of your 2 shifts, and your father tells you to keep your mouth shut. You go with them to the neighbor's house or the Lord's manor or even the village alehouse if it's that kind of deal. There's bread, maybe cheese, maybe beer. A few formal words are spoken. And just like that, your future is no longer your own. You're engaged before your body's even caught up to the idea. Your chest is still mostly flat. Your hair is still always tangled. But they look at you and see a vesseler future wife, a future womb. You're 12, maybe 13. And nobody thinks that's odd. You might feel a flutter of excitement, sure. Someone wants you, that has to mean something, right? But beneath that flutter is a sinking too. You don't know this boy, or this man. You've never spoken beyond a shy nod. What if he smells bad? What if he's cruel? What if he snores like your uncle and chews with his mouth open? These are the things you wonder because no one tells you what really matters yet. Not out loud, but the town knows. Oh, they know everything. That you've been promised. That your body now exists in a kind of strange limbo, still a child's, but being counted down like a loaf, baking in the oven, just a little longer, and you'll be ready. One documented custom in certain medieval villages. Girls were presented with symbolic bridal bread once betrothed. It looked sweet, ceremonial, sugar-dusted, even braided. But it wasn't meant to be eaten by her, it was for others. A way to say, she's spoken for now, hands off. A snack and a signal all in one. Meanwhile, you go back to chores. Your parents are a little more watchful now. Your brothers joke about your future husband, nudging each other with elbows and grins. You want to slap them, but you just grit your teeth. The game is already set in motion. Historians still debate how much say girls truly had in their betrothals. Some claim that peasant families, especially in tight-knit villages, allowed daughters to refuse matches they hated. Others argue that such refusals came with consequences, shame, gossip, even punishment. The truth, as usual, probably lies somewhere messy and grey in the middle. You overhear your mother once, whispering with a neighbour, something about how lucky you are that he has only the one wife and not too many debts. Comforting. Like being told you're marrying a man with only mild fleas instead of an infestation. You're expected to begin preparing, not emotionally, there's no space for that. Preparing your dowry, your new garments, your household skills. Your mother tests you with harder tasks, baking alone, weaving with tight attention, stitching with cleaner hems. She watches your hands closely. Your hands will speak louder than your words in your new life. And then there's your body. It starts to change. Your hips widen, your chest fills out a bit, and suddenly men start noticing you differently. Their gazes linger. They smile with fewer teeth and more implication. You feel it and you hate it. You walk faster. You keep your eyes down, but it doesn't stop them. It never does. Your monthly blood comes. Maybe it's frightening. Maybe it's just gross. Your mother gives you old cloths and vague instructions. Keep quiet about it, she warns. Don't let the boys see. You do as you're told, hiding rags under the bed, scrubbing them out in secret. You try not to cry, but your body feels foreign. You're not ready to be a woman, and yet that's exactly what everyone around you now expects you to be. There's no talk of love, not real love, the kind with laughter and comfort and shared secrets. The idea that marriage could include friendship, let alone romance, is laughable. Your role is already outlined: obedient wife, capable homemaker, healthy birther of sons. Bonus points if you're also quiet and pious. And yet, in the dark before sleep, you dream. You dream of saying no, of running to a convent, of living in a hut by the river, and talking to animals like a forest witch. You know none of that is likely, but you dream it anyway. One odd historical tidbit. In some parts of 14th century France, people believed a girl who brushed her hair exactly 100 strokes each night would trap the affection of her betrothed forever. You try it once with a borrowed comb, counting carefully. Your arms hurt by stroke 63, but you keep going. It's silly, but it feels like doing something. And that's rare. Soon there's talk of the wedding. Maybe it's months off. Maybe just weeks. Either way, you feel time shifting, like the days themselves are nudging you forward against your will. You wake one morning and realize your childhood is behind you, not because of any grand moment or celebration, but because everyone has already decided who you are now. And you just keep walking forward. The wedding is set. There's no dramatic countdown, no fluttering invitations, no bachelorette party with flowers and laughter, Just your mother laying out an extra loaf of bread, your father shaking the hand of the groom's cousin, and you being told to stand up straight and stop fidgeting. You don't have a choice. But you already knew that. They dress you in your best shift, maybe bleached linen if your family could afford it, still smelling faintly of the lice soap your mother made herself. Over it, a borrowed overdress that pinches at the waist, not because it fits, but because you've grown and no one bothered to let the seams out. Doesn't matter. This isn't about comfort. The veil is thin. The room is thick with expectation. Outside, there's a small crowd. Weddings are public affairs, community property, really. Not because they're joyful, though people pretend they are, but because they're contracts, social glue. Your marriage might help secure land access, or bring two feuding families into reluctant alliance. Or maybe in your case it's just because he needed a wife, and your father needed to stop feeding you. The church ceremony is quick. You say the words. You probably don't understand them all, especially if they're in Latin, but you repeat what you're told. The priest doesn't look at you, not really. He speaks to your father, then your husband. You're somewhere between a participant and a prized cow being branded. One mainstream historical fact. Until the 12th century, church law didn't require weddings to happen inside churches. You could be married at the church door with witnesses and then just walk away as a wife. It was that informal. The holy part came after. And the consummation, well, that's the real signature. So you walk home beside a man you barely know. If you're lucky, he's not old. If you're really lucky, he's not drunk. The villagers cheer as you pass. Some throw flower petals, others just stare. You keep your eyes forward and your face pleasant the way you were taught. Inside your new home, his home, you try to memorize where everything is without seeming nosy. He shows you the hearth, the basin, the bedding. He doesn't ask how you're feeling. You don't expect him to. That's not his role. And yours? Well, it begins now. You sit on the edge of the straw-stuffed mattress. The room smells like old bread and damp wool. He takes off his boots. You try not to flinch. There's a moment brief, awkward, heavy where he hesitates, and you hold your breath because you know what's expected. And whether it's gentle or hurried, sweet or silent or grim, it happens. Because that's what the vows meant. That's what the bread and the handshake and the blessing meant. You're a wife now. You lie awake afterward, watching the shadows shift on the thatch above you. You're sore. You feel odd, both grown and ghost-like. You wonder if your mother felt the same. You wonder if she cried. You didn't, but you wanted to. And in the morning, you get up and start sweeping. No honeymoon, no special breakfast, just a new rhythm to learn and a whole new list of duties. You are now expected to manage the home clean, cook, spin, serve, save. If you fail, your husband is shamed. And a shamed man, as the village will tell you, is a dangerous one. Here's a little-known historical quirk. In parts of Germany, it was customary to give a newly married woman a ceremonial wooden spoon, not for cooking, for discipline, a symbol that she now had authority over her husband's meals and he had authority over her if she burned them. Charming. You meet your neighbors. They watch you closely, not with malice, but with that quiet, calculating judgment women reserve for new brides. You're appraised like a cow again. Will she work hard? Will she keep quiet? Will she give him sons, children? The topic lingers in every conversation. May God bless your womb, they say. May you be fruitful. You nod and smile and clutch your belly protectively, even though it's still just yours. For now. You bleed again, and the blood is met with disappointment, not relief. Not having a child soon is seen as a bad omen, or a bad wife, or both. You try to pray harder. Try to drink the teas your mother packed for fertility. Try to hold your breath when you pass a pregnant woman, just in case the wind carries her blessing to you. Historians still debate the average age of medieval consummation. While girls were often betrothed as early as 7, many regions imposed age restrictions for marital bedding, sometimes 12, sometimes 14. But in practice, these rules were often ignored, bent, or loosely enforced. What mattered wasn't age. It was readiness, and readiness was a vague word at best. Back in your home, you tried to create comfort where none was offered. You stitch your initials onto a rag to make it feel like it belongs. You hum songs while baking just to break the silence. You rearrange the storage jars when your husband is looking, hoping he won't notice or care. You begin to anticipate his moods. Is he the type who storms when he's angry or goes quiet? Does he drink too much? Does he touch you when he's sad? These become daily calculations, quiet math you do behind your eyes while pouring stew or mending socks. You write letters in your head to your mother, to the girl you used to be. You pretend someone will read them one day, but you know they'll stay in your skull, locked away like everything else. And slowly, the weight of marriage settles on your shoulders, not like a warm shawl, but like wet wool. Heavy, inevitable, scratchy. You are someone's wife now, and no one ever asks if that's what you wanted. You wake before dawn because that's what wives do. There's no gentle tap on the shoulder, no whispered good morning. Just the creak of the door as your husband leaves for the fields and the cold rush of air that follows him. You wrap a shawl around your shoulders, set your feet on the stone floor, and begin the day. Everything in this house now belongs to you except that nothing really does. The pots, the broom, the chickens out back, the stew in the cauldron, they're yours to manage, but not to own. You're more of a steward than a mistress. If you make a mistake, it reflects on him. If you succeed, it's seen as expected. Breakfast is no feast, maybe barley porridge, maybe stale bread softened in milk. You eat standing up because the fire needs tending, and the chamber pot needs emptying, and the water must be fetched before the line at the well gets too long. Life with a stranger is strange only at first. Then it becomes routine. He comes home with mud on his boots, sweat on his brow, and barely a glance for you unless the meal is late. If you're lucky, he's quiet. If you're really lucky, he falls asleep quickly. But most days, you talk. Not deeply, never about dreams or fears or your old doll made of rags, but about chores, about trade, about when the cow might calve. His voice is a low rumble that you come to recognize like weather. There's stormy, hungry, tired and drunk. Your job is to match your tone accordingly. A misplaced joke, a sigh too loud, and suddenly the whole room goes cold. You begin to forget what you used to be afraid of because new fears take their place. Will the bread rise? Will the chickens lay? Will the baby, if there is one, survive? You're still barely past childhood yourself, but no one calls you a girl anymore. You're a wife. You are his. One historical fact. In medieval England, wives were legally subsumed under their husbands' identities, and this concept was called coverture. You had no separate legal existence, couldn't own property, couldn't testify in court against him. In the eyes of the law, you were one person, and that person was him. You learn to make yourself smaller in other ways too. Step softly, speak briefly, smile when guests are near. The more agreeable you are, the less trouble you attract. And you really don't want trouble. What's trouble, you ask? A neighbor woman with bruises, she won't explain. A wife caught speaking sharply to her husband in the marketplace. A girl who runs off with the stable boy. They all become lessons, whispered stories you hear over washing baskets and spinning wheels. The message is clear. Don't make waves, but even silence has weight. You try to talk to your husband some nights hoping for more. Maybe he tells you about his childhood briefly. Maybe you laugh once together, and for a moment, he seems almost young again, like you imagined husbands might be. But mostly, you serve. You nod. You offer your body when asked, and hope he doesn't notice the wince. There's no privacy, of course. Your home is one room, maybe two if he's prosperous. If relatives visit, you sleep on the floor. If someone's ill, you clean up after them. You always clean up. You start to measure time by small things. The growth of the onions, the pace of your spinning, the change in his footsteps when he walks up the lane. You find comfort in rhythm. Because without it, your days blur into each other like water on a window pane. Want something quirky? Some women hung bundles of lavender or rosemary by the hearth knot, just for smell, but to sweeten the mood of the household. One French superstition held that rosemary under the mattress could reduce arguments. You try it once, he sneezes all night. So much for that. Historians still argue whether medieval husbands and wives developed genuine affection. Some did. There are letters that hint at tenderness, at private jokes, even love. Others were partnerships of necessity and survival. Marriage wasn't a romance, it was a job. And like any job, some days are harder than others.
He comes home angry once. You don't know why. A bad deal, a sick animal, a comment from the reeve. You don't ask. He throws his tunic to the ground. The stew is too thin, the fire too low. You take the words like rain, let them hit, let them roll off. But inside, they sink. You carry them with you long after the shouting stops. The next day, he brings you a ribbon. A simple one, coarse but dyed red. He doesn't say why, just drops it in your lap. You say thank you. You don't ask if it's an apology. It doesn't matter. You wear it the next day anyway. And life goes on. You manage the household like a captain steers a ship. Quietly, skillfully, behind the scenes. You know how many beans are left, how much wool to trade, how to stretch a stew with turnips. You don't get praise. You get not yelled at. That's close enough. You talk to the neighbour wives carefully about weather, about babies, about husbands sometimes, in the safe-coded language of eye rolls and sighs.
You form a sort of sisterhood, not of deep trust, but of shared understanding. You all walk the same rope, just at different ends. Sometimes you think about running. Not seriously, just a whisper of a thought when you see the horizon glow with sunset, and remember what it looked like before you had to stay indoors and count chickens. But you don't run. Where would you go? With what coin? With what name? So you stay. And you become good at it. You become so good at surviving that no one even notices how hard it is anymore. You've only been married a little while, but already there's one question hanging in the air like the scent of burnt bread. Are you pregnant yet? No one asks it outright, not at first. They just look at your waist. They mention saints who bless fertility. They nudge each other when you don't drink the ale, even if you just don't like the taste. Your body is now a vessel, let's be honest. It always was, but now it's under surveillance. Not from doctors, of course. There are no ultrasounds or waiting rooms, just midwives with calloused fingers and mothers-in-law who inspect how tired you look. You miss a period, and suddenly everyone's eyes are twinkling. You get your period again, and the twinkle dims. When you finally are pregnant, the world shifts again. You're not just a wife anymore, you're a wife with purpose. Congratulations, you're fulfilling your function, but pregnancy is no celebration. You don't glow. You swell, ache, leak, and worry. Your feet are always sore, your back has opinions. You throw up for days on end while still kneading bread and chasing chickens. No one pats your shoulder and tells you to rest. You have work to do, and that baby isn't a ticket to ease. It's just another layer of responsibility wrapped in discomfort. And childbirth? Oh, you've heard stories. Everyone has. You know about screaming, about women who bled too much, or whose babies came the wrong way, or who were perfectly fine 1 hour and buried the next. You try not to think about it, but it's impossible. Every kick reminds you that something is growing inside you that might kill you in the process of being born. One mainstream historical fact: in medieval Europe, maternal mortality rates were shockingly high. Somewhere between 1 in 10 to 1 in 20 women died during childbirth. No anesthesia, no sterile tools, just hope, prayer, and maybe a midwife with decent instincts. You give birth. Maybe it's your first, maybe it's not. But the experience is the same. Pain that explodes into the center of your world. You scream. You bleed. You push with everything you have, and still, it might not be enough. If you survive, and you do, barely, you're praised for your strength. The baby is swaddled, and you're handed broth. That's your reward. You lie in bed, barely able to move, while your husband drinks to the good fortune of a son, or sulks, if it's a daughter. And here's a fringe tidbit. In some parts of medieval Europe, new mothers were forbidden from entering a church until they'd undergone a churching ceremony. It wasn't just a blessing, it was a kind of purification, as though giving birth made you spiritually dirty. A fun little postscript to nearly dying. You recover slowly, or not at all. Maybe something tore, maybe something inside you feels wrong, but you don't talk about it. You just get up, you cook again, you hold the baby, you press your belly, wincing, while stirring stew with the other hand. Historians still argue whether women truly internalized these expectations or simply endured them. Did they feel pride in surviving childbirth after childbirth, or did they quietly suffer, never voicing their resentment? Most records were written by men, so the truth is buried beneath layers of guesswork and silence. Soon you're pregnant again. You barely remember what it felt like to have your body to yourself. You're either carrying a baby, nursing one, or burying one. Sometimes all three in the same year. Grief becomes a companion. It wears different faces, sometimes soft, sometimes sharp. A baby who doesn't cry, a toddler who coughs and won't stop. You know mothers who've buried 3, 4, 5 children. You don't even ask anymore. You just nod and press a hand to their shoulder. There's no therapy, no break. You make dinner the same night your child dies. Life doesn't stop. The fire still needs feeding. And your husband? Maybe he mourns. Maybe he doesn't. Maybe he just drinks. Maybe he starts avoiding your eyes, as though your loss might be contagious. You keep going anyway. Your body becomes your battlefield. Your hips, your back, your breasts, they all ache. You leak milk unexpectedly. You develop odd pains, fevers, chills. The midwife mutters about bad humours and offers a poultice, or leeches. You try not to laugh or cry. Want a quirky detail? Some women in medieval Europe wore little birthing amulets, tiny metal charms shaped like wombs, saints, or strange animals to protect their babies in the womb. You have one too tied around your neck with fraying thread. You don't believe in it, but you keep it on anyway. You're never not tired. Your sleep is broken by cries, by hunger, by worry. You start to dream about sleeping more than you dream about anything else. And still the work doesn't stop. You cook, you clean, you nurse. You mend socks with one hand and rock the cradle with the other. You learn to hum lullabies on a loop until your own ears go numb. You whisper stories that aren't really stories, just whatever comes into your head that might keep a sick child calm until morning. One night, you wake up soaked. Blood again. You know what that means. You don't scream. You just clean yourself up quietly, as you always do. In the morning, you bury another dream wrapped in cloth under the apple tree, and no one mentions it again. You sit alone that afternoon, staring at the fire. The baby you do have still needs feeding. Your husband wants supper. The cow is lowing. You close your eyes just for a second and then you get up, because that's what wives do. You wake up stiff, not sore in the way people feel after a long walk or a night on a lumpy mattress. No, this is deeper. Your joints crack, your knees ache. Your hands feel like they've been wrapped around a spinning wheel in your sleep, and they probably have in some restless dream version of your daily routine. Welcome to the medieval housewife Olympics. There are no medals, no cheering crowds, just endless events that repeat every day and somehow always get harder. First up, the fire-starting sprint. You roll out of bed and crouch by the hearth, poking at coals that barely stayed alive overnight. Your breath fogs in the air. You coax a flame with twigs and prayer. When it catches, you exhale like you've won something. You haven't. Second, the bucket relay. Water doesn't come from a tap, it comes from the well, or worse, the river. That's a 15-minute walk each way, carrying sloshing weight that bruises your hips and strains your back. And if someone else gets there before you, guess what? You wait your turn, then make 2 trips. Third, laundry, lift and hurl. It's wash day, which means scrubbing clothes with lye and stones until your fingers look like they've aged 30 years. There's no soap as you'd know it, just caustic, homemade paste that smells faintly of goat. You dunk, scrub, beat, wring. You do it all again next week. But wait, you say, where's the food? Cooking is its own competition. Bread must rise, porridge must not burn, ale must be brewed if you can't trust the water, which you can't. And you better hope the weather's good, or you'll be making soup from wilted onions and stale barley. You cook while bouncing a baby on your hip and keeping the fire from going out. Multitasking? Please, you invented it. Here's a mainstream historical fact. Medieval women were responsible for all aspects of domestic food preparation. That included not just cooking, but preserving, salting, smoking, brewing, and sometimes even butchering. You were your own grocery store and chef and food safety inspectoral without running water or refrigeration. Your next challenge, childcare decathlon. If you have 1 child, it's hard. If you have 5, it's impossible. 1 is teething, 1 has a cough. 1 fell in a puddle and smells like mildew.
And don't forget the neighbour's baby you agreed to watch because she had to help with a birth across the road. You spend the afternoon spinning wool, the baby tied to your back with an old shawl, while your toddler tries to eat charcoal again. You don't panic. You just pry it out of her mouth, sigh, and hand her a potato to gnaw on instead. Quirky tidbit for you. Some mothers tied bells to their toddlers' tunics so they could hear them getting into trouble from across the room. You'd do the same if you had a spare bell and 2 seconds to sew it on. And while you juggle all this, you're expected to look nice. Your husband doesn't want a grumpy, grimy wife. He wants a smiling one with neat hair and clean hands 7 if you've been ankle deep in goat manure all morning. So you pinch your cheeks for colour. You smooth your hair with butter if oil isn't available. You straighten your apron and wipe the dirt from your face using the cleanest corner of your sleeve.
Historians still debate how much personal grooming was expected of medieval women. We know that bathing was infrequent, sometimes monthly, sometimes seasonal, but women often perfumed themselves with herbs or flower water and used fine combs to detangle their hair, not because it was easy, but because it was expected. At this point in your day, you might be hoping for a break. Nope. Mending marathon begins at dusk. Socks need darning, tunics need patching. That hole in the thatch? Guess who gets to fix it? You stitch by candlelight, eyes straining, fingers sore, baby finally asleep in a cradle you built from leftover crates, and hope. Dinner is modest, cabbage stew and a crust of bread. Your husband eats first. You wait, then clean, always clean. You don't collapse into bed, you sink into it, every muscle groaning. You try to count how many steps you took today, but your brain gets stuck somewhere around too many. You think about the woman down the road who died last week after falling from a ladder while patching the roof. They buried her in a sheet because there wasn't enough cloth for a shroud. You turn over and whisper, "I'm tired," but no one hears. Everyone else is tired too. One more quirky detail before you fall asleep. In some towns, women wore small metal tokens worn smooth over time as proof of participation in guild work or communal chores. You imagine carrying one just to be able to say, "Look, I was here, I did all of this," but you don't need a token, you have blisters, and those tell the story just fine. And tomorrow, you do it all again. You wake up scratching, not thoughtfully, desperately, behind your ear, at the nape of your neck, down your spine. It's the lice again. At this point, they're practically house pets. You've tried rinsing your hair with vinegar, combing it with a hot iron needle, even whispering a saint's name over your head like your neighbor swears by. Nothing helps. This is hygiene, medieval style. Bathing? Rare? Optional? Suspect? Most people think warm water opens your pores and sin rushes right in, or disease, or demons. Some even say too many baths can weaken the body. So instead, you do what everyone else does. You wash your hands and face with cold water, scrub your feet now and then, and change your underclothes when the moon changes. Your bathroom is either a bucket in the corner or a walk to the communal pit toilet behind the house, buzzing with flies and shame. You squat quickly, hoping no one walks by. If it's winter, the seat is frozen. If it's summer, the smell could drop a grown man. Either way, it's over fast. And deodorant? Forget it. You mask scent with herbs, lavender if you're lucky, rosemary if you're practical. You crush them into small pouches and tuck them into your bodice. That helps. A little. Here's a mainstream fact. In many medieval towns, full-body bathing was limited to bathhouses, which often doubled as social centres and, eventually, as places of ill repute. Once the church caught wind of that, public bathing declined sharply. In some areas, bathhouses were outlawed altogether. Instead, you learn the art of spot cleaning, a damp cloth, a sharp eye. You clean the creases of your neck, behind your knees, under your arms. You brush your teeth with ash or salt. You scrape your nails with the blunt edge of a knife. Hygiene is a battle, and you're outgunned. Still, people make an effort. You pluck your eyebrows with a fishbone. You wipe your face with bread crust to absorb oil. You rinse your eyes with chamomile tea when they burn from smoke. None of this makes you glow, it just makes you slightly less miserable. And then there's makeup. Yes, makeup. It exists, but not the kind you'd want. Want to whiten your face? Try lead-based powder. That's right, lead. It covers blemishes, yes, but it also poisons you slowly. Lips too pale? Use crushed beetroot or cochineal bugs. Need blush? Pinch your cheeks. Hard. Done. Historians still argue whether medieval women actually wore cosmetics on a regular basis. Church leaders condemned vanity, but fashion among nobles often leaned toward the ghostly white look. Some women bled themselves slightly before events to achieve that wan, delicate appearance, elegant, in a half-dead sort of way. You don't have time for that. You're busy trying not to smell like a compost bin. And what about your clothing? It's wool. Always wool. In winter, it's scratchy and damp. In summer, it's scratchy and hot. You wear layers because warmth is vital. But warmth means sweat, and sweat means stench. There's no dry shampoo, just bonnets to hide greasy hair, and aprons to soak up spills. You have 2 sets of clothes. If one gets too filthy, you rinse it in cold water, slap it on a rock, and wear it half dry. That's your routine. That's everyone's routine. You do it so often you don't even notice the smell anymore, but sometimes, just sometimes, you catch a whiff of something clean soap from the manor or herbs from a passing cart, and you remember that cleanliness used to be a joy, a luxury, a feeling, not just a task. Want a fringe detail? Some medieval women believed rubbing crushed sage under their arms would prevent sweat and body odor. Others carried sweet apple-small-scented cloth balls to press against their noses in crowded markets. You keep one tucked in your pocket. It smells like thyme and damp wool. But it helps. Your bed, by the way, is its own hygiene horror show. Straw mattress, probably damp. Home to insects. You change the straw once a season. Maybe. You shake the blanket every morning. That's your routine. You ignore the bites. That's also routine. And don't forget menstrual care. You use rags washed and reused endlessly. You stuff them with moss if you're short. You wash them in secret. You dry them where no one can see. You don't talk about it. No one does. If you bleed through, you get a look, maybe a comment, maybe worse. You learn to walk carefully, to sit only on dark cloth, to carry an extra rag tucked into your waistband just in case. The worst part of all this? Not the smell, not the stains, not even the lice. It's the expectation. You're still meant to appear fresh, presentable, ladylike, a walking contradiction, overworked and elegant, poor and polished, glowing but never from sweat. Your husband notices if you fail. So do the neighbors. So do the church ladies who pretend not to notice. You get judged if your hair's greasy, but you also get judged if you bathe too often. You can't win, and yet you persist. You splash cold water on your face. You tuck a lavender sprig into your bodice. You comb your hair until the tangles scream, and you walk into the market holding your head just high enough to say, "I tried." Because in a world where disease lurks in the mud, where baths are suspicious and perfume is expensive, trying is all you've got. You sit by the hearth, spinning wool between fingers that are raw from work and cold from drafty windows. The house is quiet for now. The baby is asleep. Your husband is at the alehouse, and you? You're thinking not of dreams or futures or even tomorrow's chores. You're thinking about the strange truth that's been with you your whole life. You don't really exist. Not in the legal sense, anyway. You're a wife, a daughter, a mother, a servant, a shadow. But you're not a person with rights. You can't own property. You can't sign a contract. You can't even go to court unless your husband allows it, or unless you're the accused. Your role is to obey, not just socially, legally. One mainstream fact, under coverture, a legal principle used across much of medieval Europe, a married woman's identity was fully absorbed into her husband's. You couldn't sue or be sued. You couldn't own anything independently. If someone hurt you, it was your husband's injury. If he hurt you well, that was considered a domestic matter. You are, in the eyes of the law, an extension of your husband's body, which sounds romantic until you remember that he once forgot your name when he was drunk. Want to speak out against injustice? Good luck. Women's testimony is considered unreliable, emotional, untrustworthy, unless you're describing someone stealing your turnips in vivid detail, while 3 sober men nod behind you. Your words might as well be bird song. Even in church where you kneel and pray and try to scrub the sin from your soul, you're lesser. You sit in the back. You don't speak unless spoken to. Your sins are counted more heavily than a man's. Eve's legacy, they say. You carry the fall on your shoulders. And if you're unmarried, that's its own trap. A widow may have a little power, may but a single woman, a spinster, a burden. People assume you're bitter, strange, or secretly a witch, maybe all 3. So what can you do? You live inside the boundaries. You learn to maneuver within them. You smile when you're meant to, even if the smile never reaches your eyes. You ask for things indirectly. You master the art of suggestion, of sidelong comments that plant ideas in men's heads without them realizing it. It's a dangerous dance, subtlety as survival. Here's a quirky detail. In some towns, a woman could be punished for wearing clothing too fine for her station, not because she stole it, but because looking above your place was considered a threat, a disruption, appear too bold, too confident. And suddenly you're not a woman, you're a problem. Historians still argue whether this lack of rights made women more passive or more cunning. Some scholars point to court records where women acted as informal negotiators, land managers, even tax collectors on behalf of their absent husbands. Others say those were exceptions, not the rule. You suspect both are true because you know what they forget. Women talk. Maybe not in courts, but in kitchens, in fields, at wells. They pass knowledge in whispered recipes, in birthing tricks, in warnings about which men to avoid and which midwife not to trust. The real power doesn't sit in the manure, it simmers by the hearth. But still, the limits chafe. You see the injustice even if you can't name it. Like when your cousin is beaten for talking back to her husband, or when your friend's daughter is married off at 12 and everyone clucks their tongues as if that makes it better. Or when your sister's land is seized by her dead husband's brother and the priest just shrugs. You want to scream, but you don't, because screaming gets you noticed, and noticed women end up punished, or worse, blamed. So instead, you endure. You become fluent in silence. You perfect the art of nodding at things that make your stomach turn. You listen more than you speak. You turn your grief into lullabies and your rage into harder kneading. And when men joke about women's foolishness, you smile, you nod, and you remember that you once helped a neighbor write a letter her own husband couldn't spell. You might not have rights, but you're not without power. Power just looks different in your world. It's not loud, it's not law. It's the kind of power that survives quietly, that notices everything, that knows when to speak and when to vanish like smoke from a fire that never quite dies. And as the embers glow and the wool twists beneath your hands, you don't think of revolution, you think of resilience, and that though no one writes it down is enough to keep going. It's a summer morning, the kind that should feel light and golden, with the air warm and the breeze soft through the shutters. But today, you feel heavy. There's gossip at the well, whispers sharp as nettles, and all of it is about you. You made a joke last week, just a silly remark about the miller's wife and how her bread's always suspiciously round. It got laughs, maybe too many. Now someone says, you talk too much. Another says you act like a man. And just like that, you're no longer funny. You're suspicious. In your world, the space between spirited and shamed is barely the width of a ribbon. You try to shrug it off. But you know the truth. A woman's reputation is delicate. Not like laceless is tough, more like wet parchment. One wrong word, one sideways glance, and your whole name can tear in two. Virginity? Don't even get started. You had no say in when it was taken, yet your entire value used to depend on it. Your wedding night was whispered about, your sheets checked, your behavior judged. If you were lucky, you passed the unspoken test. If not, well, you might have cried into those same sheets. One mainstream fact: in some parts of Europe, especially among nobles, it was customary for a bride's virginity to be proven after the wedding by displaying blood-stained sheets. If there was no blood, questions, accusations, sometimes annulments, sometimes worse. And heaven help the girl who actually enjoys herself. If you're too modest, you're cold. If you're too warm, you're impure. This is the double bind of your time, desired but never too desiring. If your husband strays, it's your fault for not being enough. If you show affection elsewhere, even a smile, you're a temptress. So you walk the line, eyes down, voice soft, laughter kept at the back of your throat. Still, the gossip doesn't stop. Some say you've got opinions, that you speak too much about saints or bread, or what the reeve should be doing with the village fence. You think you're being helpful. Others think you're being proud. And if the gossip snowballs, if a few too many people decide you're troublesome, you might find yourself called something worse. Witch. It's a word that hangs in the air like smoke, not quite visible, but impossible to ignore. You've seen what happens, the whispers, the sudden distance, the chicken carcass tossed at a doorstep, and you know deep down that once they start calling you a witch, nothing you say will ever sound innocent again. One quirky tidbit: medieval tests for witches included things like tossing women into rivers to see if they floated, guilty, or sank, innocent, but also dead. You've heard of women accused for curing too many fevers, or owning too many cats, or simply surviving too long after their husbands died. Historians still argue whether most accused witches were healers, rebels, or simply victims of bad luck and bad neighbors. Some say the accusations were power play stools to punish women who didn't conform. Others believe fear of illness and famine drove communities to scapegoating. Whatever the truth, the pattern remains the same. Speak out, and you risk everything, so you stop speaking. You become smaller. You nod and murmur agreement when someone says the priest gave a great sermon, even though he mumbled through half of it. You smile politely at the neighbor who once claimed your rosemary smelled like poison. You avoid the square when the bailiff's around. You know how quickly a woman can go from neighbor to nuisance. Your only real refuge is among other women, behind closed doors, while grinding flour or folding linens. In those brief moments, you talk freely. You joke. You cry. You ask questions. You remember who you are when no one else is listening. But even then, you're careful, because secrets spread, and trust, in your world, is a brittle thing. There's a strange kind of freedom in being invisible. You learn to wield it like a weapon. People don't notice when you linger near doorways, or when you gather herbs from the edge of the woods, or when you whisper a lullaby that isn't quite Christian but calms a fever just the same. You're not a witch, but sometimes you wish you were. At least witches have power. Instead you have shame, or rather, the constant fear of it, like a cloak you wear even in your dreams. You worry about the way you walk, the way you hold your mouth, the way you talk to a stranger. You wonder if anyone else feels like they're living inside a performance they didn't audition for. One wrong move and the community turns. One joke and your name sours in the village's mouth. One slip and suddenly you're not a wife, or a mother, or a weaver. You're trouble. So you don't slip. You don't joke. You braid your hair neatly. You keep your voice low. You become a master of the careful life.
And in the quiet moments, between chores, between glances, between gasps of laughter you quickly swallow, you ask the question, who would I be if no one were watching? But there are always eyes, so you never find out. You wake before the sun again. Not because you want to, but because your husband is already clomping around the house, looking for his boots and muttering about the neighbor's pigs getting into his barley. You sigh, stretch out the stiffness in your arms and roll out of bed. The baby cries, the fire needs starting. The day begins like every day before it without asking your permission. It's time for another round of work until you wilt. You aren't just a housewife, you're an economic asset, whether you're weaving, brewing ale, collecting eggs, or harvesting herbs for tinctures. Your labor contributes to your family's survival, and not in a cute oh she's helping kind of way. In a if you stop working we starve kind of way. You have no office, no days off, no minimum wage, just a never-ending scroll of tasks. You don't get a coin in hand for any of them. But everyone assumes you'll just keep going. One mainstream fact: Medieval women made up a significant portion of the labour force, especially in agriculture and cottage industries. Whether as spinners, brewers, bakers or field hands, their unpaid or underpaid work kept communities running. You're not just helping in the fields, you're harvesting turnips, cutting wheat, tending sheep, and carrying baskets heavier than a sleepy toddler. You know how to use a sickle, how to avoid blisters, how to gauge when a rainstorm will ruin a crop. You're good at this, but no one calls it skill. It's just what women do, and when you're not outside, you're inside. Spinning. Always spinning. It's not glamorous. It's repetitive and dull and makes your fingers raw, but it must be done. Thread doesn't make itself. And thread becomes cloth. And cloth becomes clothes.
And clothes keep people alive through winter. Simple as that. No spinning. No shirts. No shirts. People freeze. No pressure, right? Your husband helps sometimes. Or he goes to the market. Or he drinks. You're never quite sure what kind of day it will be until you hear how loudly he shuts the door. Meanwhile, you're juggling 5 different tasks with one hand tied behind your back. Literally, if you're holding a baby. You grind flour with your foot on a pedal. You churn butter with your elbow while kneading dough with the other hand. You carry baskets strapped to your back while shoeing chickens with a stick in your front. You are the factory, the kitchen, the grocery store, the daycare, the janitor, and the nurse. Quirky tidbit for you. In some parts of medieval Europe, women were known to carry their babies to the fields in slings made of old aprons and breastfeed them while planting. No breaks, no nursery, just multitasking, medieval style, and yet no one calls you strong. One calls. They call you sturdy or dependable or hardy, never strong. That word is saved for men who plough or swing hammers, as if the quiet, endless labour of women is somehow less. Historians still argue whether peasant women truly had more autonomy because of their labour contributions. Some records show them managing entire farms while husbands were at war. Others show them ignored, erased, or punished the moment they stepped out of line. The contradiction hangs in the air like smoke. You're never idle. In fact, idleness is seen as a sin. Sloth, they call it. And a lazy woman, unforgivable. So you keep working through the fever, through the miscarriage, through the day. Your last pair of shoes falls apart and you walk barefoot over frozen ground. You keep going because stopping isn't an option. You once twisted your ankle, slipping in a pig pen. Your knee turned blue and swelled like bread dough, but no one offered help. You just tied it tight with an old rag and limped through the week. When it finally healed, your mother-in-law said, "See, that's a wife." Sometimes in the quiet part of the night you wonder what would happen if you just disappeared. Not die, just vanished. Would anyone notice how many tasks go undone? Would they miss the bread, the fresh rushes on the floor, the stitching on the baby's cap? You suspect they would, but they'd never say it out loud. Your daughter watches you. You catch her mimicking your movements, folding laundry, tucking her rag doll to sleep the way you tuck her baby brother. You smile, but inside you ache a little. She's learning too early, just like you did, and someday she'll work too. So you try to teach her what matters, not just chores, but quiet strength. How to keep her spine straight when the world leans on her. How to laugh in the garden even when your hands are bleeding. How to survive a life built on expectations so heavy they crush someone who wasn't born into them. You think about women in the village who couldn't do it anymore, who collapsed, who snapped, who just walked into the woods one day and never came back. People whisper about them like they were mad. You think maybe they were just done. You won't do that. You'll keep spinning, keep baking, keep walking to the river with that dented old bucket because someone has to. and for now, it's still you. Sunday morning arrives, and with it comes the sound of bells. They echo across the village, calling everyone to church, calling you too. You rise stiffly, brush the ash from your only half-decent gown, and braid your hair with fingers that still ache from yesterday's spinning. The baby is cranky. Your oldest son doesn't want to wear his patched tunic, but none of that matters, because today you need to look holy. You arrive and take your place at the back, of course. The front pews are for the men, the elders, the landowners. You kneel quietly, eyes cast down, lips mouthing the Latin you only half understand. You try to listen to the priest's sermon, but your mind keeps drifting to the ache in your shoulders, to the bread you left rising, to whether the chickens will stay penned. Still you pay attention, because this is not just religion, it's reinforcement. Every Sunday, you're reminded that your suffering has meaning, that bearing pain is noble, that your silence is virtuous, that your role, your place, your burdens are all part of God's plan. One mainstream historical fact: in medieval Christianity, women were seen as spiritually inferior due to Eve's role in the fall. The church taught that women must be modest, obedient, and submissive, not just to their husbands, but to male authority at large. Women were even blamed for stirring lust simply by existing. And yet, paradoxically, you're also expected to be the moral compass of the household. You teach the prayers, you light the candles, you whisper hymns while mending socks. You remind your children to fear hell and to love God. The church is the one place you are always welcome and never equal. During confession, you kneel before a man who is not allowed to marry, not allowed to touch a woman, and yet holds the keys to your forgiveness. You confess sins like impatience, envy, fatigue. You never confess how angry you really feel. That would be dangerous. You're told to be like Mary, pure, gentle, long-suffering. But most days you feel more like Martha, rushing around trying to feed everyone and getting scolded for not just sitting at the Saviour's feet. You're damned if you do, damned if you dust. Sometimes you think the saints must have been bored. So many of them are just patient, wholly through obedience. Their miracles are small, their suffering is large. You wish there was a saint of yelling into the wind or snapping brooms in half from frustration. You'd light a candle for her. Want a quirky detail? Some women carried tiny lead or pewter images of their favorite saints in their apron pockets, not for show, but to touch during labor, storms, or arguments. You keep one, a worn little St. Margaret with a crack down her side. You don't even remember where you got it. She just showed up one day in a pile of lentils, and now she's yours. Historians still argue whether the church gave medieval women power or stripped it away. On one hand, it dictated their inferiority. On the other, religious life was one of the only ways women could escape marriage and assert autonomy as nuns, abbesses, or mystics. But those paths were few and most doors remained closed. After Mass, the priest might give you a nod. He knows your name, probably. He knows how many children you have, who your husband is, but he doesn't ask if you're happy. That's not his job. Back home, religion follows you. It's stitched into your day like a red thread. Morning prayers, grace before meals, evening blessings. You cross yourself when thunder cracks, when a neighbor dies, when your baby coughs too hard. Faith is not comfort. It's habit, and maybe hope. But it can also be fear. You've heard stories of hell since you were small: fire, demons, endless suffering. You don't know how much is real, but you do know this. Women who disobey go there. Women who challenge, who tempt, who questions, trade down. So you obey. You light candles when your milk won't come in. You whisper prayers over burnt loaves. You ask for forgiveness when your heart feels hollow and you don't know why. And you hope God listens even if no one else does. Sometimes you wish faith came with fewer rules. You loved the songs, the candles, the hush of the chapel at dusk. But the guilt, the constant feeling that you're never quite holy enough, never humble enough, never grateful enough, that wears you down. You once asked your mother if she ever doubted. She looked over her shoulder before answering. "Of course," she said, "but keep that between us and the saints." So you do. You wonder what it would feel like to believe fully, to feel chosen, not just chastised, to pray without apology, to walk into a church and not feel small. But you're a woman, and in this world that's not how faith works. So you keep praying, keep lighting candles, keep folding your hands around hope like it's a secret, too delicate to speak aloud. And when you tuck your children in that night, you whisper a blessing over each one, just in case, because even if the world won't protect you, maybe heaven will. The air smells wrong. You notice it the moment you open the shutters, a thick, sour tang, like spoiled onions, and wood smoke gone sharp. Then the coughing starts. Someone in the next house, a child, wet and ragged. Your stomach tightens. Because you know that cough, and you know what's coming. The plague, they don't call it that yet. Not here, not in your little village, but rumours have been drifting down the trade roads of whole towns sealed off, markets closed, carts of bodies wheeled through the night, priests too afraid to give last rites. You told yourself it was just fear talking, superstition, distant, abstract. But now it's real. You try to go about your day, but everything feels louder, the clatter of pots, the distant bell tolling far too often, the absence of birdsong. Even your husband, usually oblivious, glances at the road more than usual, fingers twitching. You make stew, pretending this is all normal. You grind dried sage into the pot not because it helps, but because you heard once that it draws out poison. Maybe that's true. Maybe you just need something to do with your hands. One mainstream fact during the 14th century, the Black Death wiped out an estimated 30–60% of Europe's population. No one understood what caused it. Theories included miasma, bad air, punishment from God, planetary misalignment, or even demonic cats. You keep your children inside, you tie rosemary at the windows, you boil vinegar to clean your floorboards. Every cough sends your heart lurching into your throat. Every sneeze is a sentence. And yet life goes on. You're still expected to cook, to clean, to tend the animals. Your husband's appetite doesn't vanish just because the world is ending. Your baby still cries. Your body still bleeds. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some women wore amulets made of dried toads or crushed emeralds, believing they would repel disease. Others carried pomanders, little metal balls filled with herb stew sniff when walking past the sick. You try to make your own, stuffing lavender and mint into a rag tied with string. It helps. A little.
And then death arrives at your door. Not a knock. Just a neighbour you haven't seen in days, suddenly pale, lips cracked, hands shaking. She leans against your wall. You don't want to touch her, but you do. You help her lie down. You send your son for the priest. She dies before the priest gets there. No time to grieve. No one dares weep too loudly. The fear is thicker than the smoke from the hearth. Her body is taken away before the sun sets, wrapped in the same blanket her daughter was born on. You hold your children close that night. Your oldest asks, "Will we die too?" You don't answer. You just stroke her hair until she sleeps. Historians still argue whether medieval people understood the plague as a disease or as a divine punishment. Certainly many saw it as both. Processions, flagellants, and mass prayers surged across the continent. Others blamed foreigners, the poor, or women who didn't conform because fear needs a target. You wash everything twice. Then again,
You boil the linens, you scrub the floors. You whisper prayers over every chore. You burn rosemary and rue. You throw salt across the doorway. These are things you were taught. This is what survival looks like now. And still you make dinner. Because what else can you do? Your husband comes home pale and silent. You don't ask who he saw. You just give him bread and stew and sit beside him without speaking. You both watch the fire as if it can burn fear away. Then the fever hits your son. It starts with a shiver. Then the swellings come. Black under his arms, red at his neck. You feel them with trembling fingers. You've seen it now, you know. You call the midwife, she doesn't come. You try the herb poultices, the vinegar cloths, the prayers. Nothing works. He dies in your arms the next morning. You don't scream. You don't weep. You can't. There's too much to do. You wash his little body, wrap it in linen, kiss his forehead, close his eyes. You dig the hole yourself because no one will help. You don't mark the grave. You can't bear to. You just sit there as the sun rises, hands muddy, mind numb. Then you go back inside and make porridge because your other children are hungry. And this is how the plague plays favorites. It takes some, spares others, and leaves you standing in the middle of it all, still expected to feed chickens and fix broken sandals. One of your neighbors disappears. No one says anything. Another hangs garlic at her door. Another stops speaking entirely. The priest blesses the well with a shaking hand. The town quiets like an animal waiting to be hunted. And somehow you survive. You survive the loss, the fear, the months of hunger and silence and whispered curses. You keep your house warm. You hold your children tighter. You clean with vinegar until your hands bleed. You pray more than you breathe. And when it passes, because eventually it does, there is no celebration. Just silence, just memory, just the hollow echo of names no one speaks aloud. And still you keep going. Because women like you always do. It's been a week since the funeral. You barely remember it, not because of grief, but because it was so ordinary. A few prayers, a shallow grave, a neighbor too nervous to look you in the eye. And now it's over. Your husband died. He caught the fever late, and it took him fast. One night he was grumbling about burnt bread. The next he was coughing blood into his blanket. You tried. Of course you did. You boiled the herbs. You pressed the vinegar rags to his head. You prayed until your voice cracked. But it didn't matter. Now he's gone, and you are a widow. You'd think this would bring freedom. After all, no husband means no orders, no obligations, no more flinching at sudden footsteps or enduring silent meals. But in truth, it's worse, because now you're not a wife, you're a problem. One mainstream fact in medieval society, widows were often left vulnerable, especially if they had no adult sons or no dowry property. While some wealthy widows could manage land or remarry, most became dependent on their late husband's relatives or the church. Many were pushed to the margins of their communities. That's exactly what happens. His brother comes 2 days after the burial. He nods solemnly, pats your son on the head, then quietly suggests you return to your father's house. Your father? He's half-blind, one-legged, and hasn't sent word in years. You say no. You explain you're managing the house. The garden is still alive. The hens still lay. You can stay. You'll work harder. He shrugs, says, hell think on it. And then you find out he's already spoken to the reeve, already made plans to reclaim the property a home for himself. You don't even get to argue. You weren't included in the conversation. You spend the next week in a daze, trying to make the cottage seem too valuable to lose. You scrub the floors, you tidy the hedges, you smile too much when people pass. You pretend everything is fine. Inside you start to unravel. No income, no protection, no rights. Quirky tidbit. In some parts of France, widows were encouraged to wear black veils for a year, and if they removed them too early, it was taken as a sign of disrespect or even witchcraft. You don't have black cloth, so you wear grey and keep your head down. Historians still debate whether widowhood brought greater independence or deeper isolation. Some women did gain power taking over businesses, signing contracts. Others were swallowed by poverty or sent to convents against their will. You're just trying to hold on to your roof. Neighbours begin to treat you differently. The women speak more softly around you. The men look longer, some with pity, some with hunger. You're no longer a wife, you're available. And that's dangerous. One man offers to help with repairs, another brings a bit of smoked meat, wrapped neatly, as if it's not payment for something he hasn't said out loud. You decline politely, but you know the game. You've seen how widows become favours, how favours become expectations, how expectations become gossip. So you close your shutters earlier. You sharpen the blade you use for kindling. You teach your daughter to answer the door only if she knows the voice. You thought your husband's death would bring grief. It brought exposure. You're no longer behind anyone, no longer protected by a man's name. You are seen, finally, and not in the way you wanted. And your children, they look at you differently now, as if they're asking questions with their eyes that their mouths aren't old enough to form. Will we stay here? Are we safe? Is this still home? You pretend the answers are yes. You hold your son's hand a little tighter when walking to the market. You trade your last wool scarf for onions and pray no one notices the tear in your shoe. You stand taller when passing the bailiff, even though your knees shake. You try to stay invisible, but invisibility is no longer yours to hold. Widows are either objects of pity or threat. You are both. And if you can't remarry, can't be passed along like the candle stub your children fight over, then what? Then you risk becoming the village's quiet shame. One woman older, sharper than the rest, tells you in hushed tones that she has work. Not nice work, not easy work, but a way to earn. She'll show you how to collect nettles for dye, how to spin flax for rope, how to whisper prayers over sick lambs for farmers too scared to call the priest. It's not much, but it's something. And it reminds you that women like her exist. Women who survive on the edges, who build lives in the shadows, who refuse to vanish even when the world demands it. You're not a wife now, you're a widow, but you're still here. And you're still alive. And that for today will have to be enough. You stand in the low morning light, grinding dried herbs between two stones. The smell is sharp, bitter tansy, a stringent yarrow, something floral and half forgotten. You're not just making tea, you're making medicine, because the healer didn't come again. And someone's got to do it. Your neighbour's child has a fever, the kind that clings to the skin like a damp wool blanket. You tie a cloth soaked in vinegar around the boy's neck, whisper a prayer, and press a mash of ground mustard seeds and elderflower onto his chest. He coughs. You soothe him, he sleeps. You don't ask for payment, just thanks, a nod, a place at the table next time it's your turn to beg for help. You didn't ask to become the village's unofficial midwife and herbalist, but here you are. It started slowly, a cough here, a birthing there, a cut you stitched with thread boiled in salt water. You learned from your mother, who learned from hers. Not from books. Women like you don't get books. Just from watching, guessing, remembering. One mainstream fact: in the medieval period, most basic medical care, especially for the poor, was delivered by women. These lay healers used local herbs, passed down wisdom, and practical experience. They were essential, and often feared, because healing is a kind of power, and women with power, people start using words like unnatural, or dangerous, or the worst one of all, witch. Quirky tidbit: mugwort was known as a mother herb, believed to aid in childbirth, relieve pain, and even protect against evil spirits. Women carried sprigs under their aprons. You do too, more for habit than belief, but on bad days you clutch it tighter. Your remedies work. Most of the time, a tincture for fevers, a poultice for abscesses, a tea for sleeplessness. You even learn to set a broken bone with sticks and cloth, and a whispered blessing for courage. But you're not a doctor. You're not even safe. Because you know the moment one child dies under your care, they'll forget everyone you helped. Historians still debate the line between wise woman and witch in the medieval mind. Some were respected pillars of their communities, others were denounced, tortured, and executed. Often the distinction came down to whether a man in power felt threatened or failed to heal where you succeeded. You remember the midwife who came once from the next village. She wore blue, which you envied, and had perfect hands for delivering babies. A month later, when a stillbirth happened, the father swore she had cursed the child, said she muttered something during the birth. She was gone by morning. No one spoke of her again. You think about her whenever you grind herbs, whenever someone thanks you just a little too softly, whenever a priest's gaze lingers too long. But you keep helping. You help the woman whose fingers won't close from years of kneading, the girl whose belly swells when it shouldn't, the baby whose breath rattles like dry leaves. You help with what you know, with what little you have. Sometimes you burn the herbs after use, whispering thanks to the saints or to no one at all, because a little ritual can't hurt, and maybe, just maybe, it helps. You don't call it magic, you call it survival, but you know how it looks. You keep your supplies hidden in a box beneath the bed. Tied herbs, glass jars, dried mushrooms, a bone needle, a tiny wax figure you use to show where the pain is. You'd burn the whole lot if the wrong person asked questions, but until then, you keep healing. Not just others, yourself too. The work gives you purpose, a reason to rise before dawn, a reason to walk the fields gathering mint and feverfew, a reason to study the color of urine or the curve of a rash. You've become something new, a woman no longer waiting for permission. But that's dangerous too, because you're not a wife anymore, not a girl, not a nun, not quiet. You're something else, and that scares people. You're invited to help with a difficult birth. A girl not much older than your daughter, the baby is too big, and the labor stretches on through the night. You whisper, you push, you coax, you press warm cloths to her thighs, shout commands. No one dares disobey. And in the end, the child survives. So does the girl. But the girl's mother whispers later. She screamed like she was possessed. You nod. Say nothing. You know what comes next. Just in case, you bury the bloodied cloths. Wash your hands in rose water. Sit in church the next morning, head bowed. Because sometimes being seen helping is the most dangerous thing of all. Still, you wouldn't stop. You won't stop. Even if the thanks are few, the risks are high, and the whispers gather like storm clouds. You're not a witch. You're a woman who knows how to mend what's broken, and that, in this world, is enough to terrify. You press your hand to the girl's forehead. She's sweating through her shift, hair matted to her face, whimpering like a bird caught in a snare. She's in labor too early, too thin, too scared. You wipe her brow and whisper a prayer neither of you really believes, because now is the time for theology. You've done this before, many times. Babies coming too soon. Babies coming too late. Mothers screaming. Mothers silent. Some survive, some don't. You're not a midwife by training, just by necessity. One woman helps the others, and you've always been one of the women who help. It's strange how you become both mother and martyr, giver of life and witness to death, without ever getting to pause between the two. You deliver the baby. It's small but breathing. The mother, barely a woman, stares at the ceiling, dazed. You clean them both. Wrap the child. Press warm wine to the girl's lips. Tell her to sleep, though you know she won't. You know the way fear sits inside the chest and flutters like a caged bird. You walk home with blood still under your fingernails. Your own children are asleep. Your oldest daughter has tried to keep the fire going. She's burned half a loaf doing it, but you say nothing. You just hug her and feel her little bones press into your ribs. Then you check the baby, your baby, the youngest born in silence last winter. He's been ill lately, thin, fussy. You knew something wasn't right. You've tried your herbs, your prayers, your breast, your best. But tonight his chest rises shallow, then stops. You shake him gently. You whisper his name. But you know, and just like that, you've joined the oldest club in the world, the mothers who bury their children. One mainstream fact, child mortality in medieval Europe was staggeringly high. Between 30–50% of children died before age 5. It wasn't rare. It was expected, but that didn't make it easier. It just made it lonelier. You don't cry at first. You sit there, still. You hold his little hand, still warm. You remember the way he laughed 2 weeks ago, the tiny hiccup he made in his sleep. You remember thinking he'd live, then the tears come, quiet at first, then sharp, ragged animal. You bury your face in your skirt. Your daughter wakes, she doesn't ask. She just crawls into your lap and presses her face against your shoulder. You stay like that until the sun comes up. There's no ceremony, just a hole behind the house. You wrap him in a cloth you spun yourself. You dig with hands, with sticks, with anything. The earth is stubborn. So are you. You lower him in. You don't mark the grave. You just whisper a name into the dirt and walk back inside. And life goes on. You have 2 living children still, a house, a cow, a neighbor who needs help with a breech calf. You don't get time to unravel. Your body still aches from the birth months ago. Your back, your chest, even your teeth. Pregnancy pulls more from you than it gives. You bled for days afterward. Too long. Your legs shook. You thought maybe you'd follow your baby into the dark, but you didn't. You're still here. And you're still bleeding. You once asked a traveling monk why God made women bleed so much. He looked scandalized and muttered something about Eve. You never asked again. Historians still debate whether the suffering of motherhood was romanticized or ignored in medieval records. Most of what's written comes from male scribes who either saw motherhood as saintly or shameful, nothing in between. But you know it's both, holy and horrible, miraculous and mundane. One quirky tidbit. Some women in medieval England believed that wearing coral beads would protect babies from death in infancy. You once traded half a chicken for one. It broke the day before your son died. You keep the pieces in a cloth bag anyway. You return to your routines. You grind herbs, you mend shirts, you teach your daughter how to wash the linens in cold water so they dry faster. You light a candle for your baby every week at church, but you don't speak his name aloud. People stop asking after a while. You help deliver another baby 2 months later. The mother survives, the baby too. You smile when you place the child in her arms. And afterward, when you return home, you sit beside your hearth and stare at the fire until it burns low. You feel hollow some days, like your bones are still here, but the rest of you floated off. But you keep going, because there's always someone else to help. Another baby coming, another mother whispering your name at midnight, another child burning with fever. You're needed. That's the hardest part. You don't get to disappear. You don't get to lie in the dirt with your grief. You get to wash your hands, tie back your hair, and keep showing up. And maybe that's a kind of holiness too. Not the saints on stained glass windows, but the kind that kneels in the blood and the smoke and the heartbreak and keeps going anyway. Your fingers are bleeding again, not from injury, just from your clothing, or rather from making it. You've been sewing all morning, threading the coarse needle through rough wool, trying to turn a pile of old fabric into something presentable. Your daughter needs a new dress, your son's tunic is too short, and your own shift has holes in places that really should not have holes. And it's not just about covering your body, it's about looking respectable. Because in your world, what you wear says everything about who you are. A crooked hem, you're lazy. A loose bodice, you're indecent. Stains, you're poor but also somehow still judged for it. Welcome to medieval fashion, where the clothes don't just make the woman, they expose her. If you're a peasant like most, you wear wool, always wool. It's heavy in winter, stifling in summer, scratchy always. You shift basically, your underwear is made from undyed linen if you're lucky, or hemp if you're not. You only have 1 or 2 sets, which you patch until the fabric gives up. And over that, a long dress, an apron, maybe a cloak. You cinch it all with a belt. You pin your sleeves with hand-carved brooches if you have them. If not, you tie them with string. One mainstream fact, sumptuary laws in medieval Europe regulated what people could wear based on class. That meant you could be fined for wearing a colour or fabric deemed too fine for your station. No silk, no crimson, no fur unless it's squirrel or rabbit. Velvet, don't even dream about it. But people bend the rules, always. You dye your apron with onion skins to give it a richer hue. You trim a veil with cheap lace that looks expensive. You tuck herbs in your bodice not just for the scent, but because they make you feel beautiful. And then there's the matter of comfort. Spoiler, you don't get much. Corsets aren't quite a thing yet. Not the tight-laced Victorian kind, but bodices are snug, stiffened with layers of wool or flax. Your shoes, made of leather if you're lucky, or scraps of cloth sewn around your feet if you're not. They wear through in weeks. And socks? Ha ha. You wrap your feet in rags, but you still care how you look. Because no matter how tired, how sore, how poor, you're expected to appear modest and attractive somehow at the same time. And not for yourself, for others, for the neighbours, for the priest, for your husband, if you still have one, for your children, who notice more than you think. You pin your hair back tight, tucking every wisp under a linen coif. Married women cover their hair. It's custom. Some even call it sinful not to. Virgin heads are bare, yours is not. It hasn't been for years. Want a quirky tidbit? Some women applied a paste made of vinegar and goat's milk to their faces to soften the skin. Others rubbed chalk or crushed pearl into their cheeks for a pale glow. You once tried flour, it worked, briefly, until the dog licked your face. Historians still argue whether medieval women saw fashion as creative expression or merely duty. Some portraits and writings suggest pride in appearance, well-tied sleeves, beautifully woven belts. Others suggest anxiety, guilt, fear of vanity. You feel a bit of both. Some days you want to disappear inside your clothes, wrap yourself in fabric like armor, let the layers say what you can't. I am respectable, I am untouchable, I belong here. Other days you want color, a blue ribbon, a red stitch, something that feels like a whisper of you, not just a billboard of your role. You remember when you were young, watching the noblewoman ride through the village. Her dress shimmered like wet slate, and her veil caught the wind like a banner. You didn't want to be her, you didn't even understand what she was, but you wanted that feeling, that power, that freedom to shine. But you don't ride, you walk, and your dress drags in the mud. Still you find small ways to make beauty. A stitched pattern on your daughter's sleeve, a row of scallops along your hem, a dyed ribbon hidden under your apron, just for you. Little defiant acts of self. And you teach your daughter too, not just to sew and spin and mend, but to see, to notice texture, to care about form, to find joy in choosing a colour, even if there are only 2 to choose from, to hold her chin high, even when her clothes are threadbare. You do all this while pricking your fingers for the 100th time. while squinting through smoke, while the baby cries and the stew bubbles and your back throbs, because you're a woman. And no matter how heavy the dress, how stiff the bodice, how cracked the shoes, you still show up. Still stitch beauty into burlap. Still smooth your sleeves before stepping outside. Still find a way to say, "I'm here." The castle walls rise high above the village, a pale stone crown on the hill. You pass them sometimes when you're sent with bread or herbs or linens. The guards rarely look at you, the servants barely speak. But you glance up anyway, because inside those walls, life must be different. And for some women, it is. If you're born to a noble family, you don't work the fields or carry water. You're dressed in layers of fine wool and linen, maybe even silk, if your family is powerful enough. You learn to read and write sometimes. You might speak French or Latin. You know how to curtsy, how to hold a goblet, how to look gracious without blinking. But even here, in this world of featherbeds and embroidered curtains, you're still not free. Because inside the castle you are ornament, obedience, and expectation. Your value isn't measured in your ability to plough or sow, but in your ability to marry, host, and stay beautiful while doing it. One mainstream historical fact: noble women were often married off as early as 12 with little say in the matter. Their marriages secured land, peace treaties, or dowry arrangements. Love was not required. Strategy was. You're trained for display. Your posture, your smile, your voice, all practiced. You entertain your husband's guests even if they bore you to tears. You sit at feasts without eating too much. You laugh when expected, dance when summoned, and pretend not to notice when your husband flirts with the kitchen maid. You do not inherit lands unless every male relative is dead. You don't speak at court unless spoken to. You might have influence but never power. And if your husband dies, you might gain some temporary authority if you produce a male heir. If not, you return to your father's house, or worse, sent to a convent like unwanted furniture. You're never quite your own. In your chambers, you pass the hours with embroidery. You stitch tiny flowers that no one will ever truly notice. You play the lute, if you were lucky enough to learn. You feed doves on the balcony. You walk through gardens you didn't plant. And all the while, you wait for letters, for orders, for visits, for pregnancies, for praise. You wait and smile and keep yourself refined. Historians still argue whether noble women were quietly powerful behind the scenes or simply prisoners in prettier cages. Letters from some queens and duchesses suggest real influence managing estates, advising husbands. Others leave no voice at all. Just records of marriages, deaths, and dowries. Want a quirky detail? In some courts, noble women kept tiny lapdogs not for companionship, but for warmth. The dogs slept in their sleeves or on their feet to keep the chill off at night. You wonder if the dogs were happier than their mistresses. There's glamour, yes, feasts, fabrics, foreign spices. You wear blue, the most expensive color, made from lapis lazuli. Your hair is braided like ropes of gold. Your hands smell like rose water. And yet the rules are iron beneath all that velvet. Don't speak too loud. Don't eat too fast. Don't ever be seen alone with a man who isn't your kin. Don't read books that aren't approved by the priest. Don't. You remember one noble woman, quiet, kind, who read poetry late at night and wore trousers under her skirts while riding. She laughed too freely. She talked about the stars. One day she was gone. No one explained. You become careful. You learn to play the game, to flatter the right people, to feign interest in dull conversations, to pretend you're not furious when your embroidery is criticized by someone who can't thread a needle. You become a master of manners and of swallowing your own voice. Still you dream. You dream while staring at the ceiling above your bed, painted like the night sky. You wonder what it would be like to ride beyond the hills with no escort, to wear trousers, to shout across a valley, to climb a tree, to fall in love with someone you chose, but you wake up and fold your hands in your lap like always, and you smile, because noble women don't shout. They glide, they bless, they endure, and sometimes, if they're clever, they influence. Quietly, through whispered suggestions, through sons raised with purpose, through household accounts and letters written in firm, clear Latin. But power, real power, that stays in other hands. You're a woman, a noble woman. You may have fine sheets and silver spoons, but the bars of your cage are just polished enough to reflect your own face. It's quiet, too quiet. You sit by the hearth, spinning again, the same motion, the same rhythm, the same weight in your chest. But something inside you stirs, something restless, coiled like thread, waiting to snap. You've done everything right, been dutiful, been obedient. You've prayed, birthed, stitched, mourned. You've said yes more times than you can count, and still your world remains small, your rights invisible, your name unrecorded. But not every woman stays quiet. Some don't. You've heard stories, hushed at first, then louder, carried in baskets of gossip from village to village. Stories of women who said no, women who walked away from bad marriages, even if it meant sleeping in barns or convent doorways. Women who struck back, shouted, threw things, refused to kneel. Women who brewed beer better than the men, and sold it under their own names until the guilds pushed them out. You remember the old widow who taught you how to stitch faster. She never married again. She wore men's boots and muttered to herself. But she always had money. No one dared take it from her. Or the young girl accused of witchcraft, not because she hexed anyone, but because she outlived her third pregnancy. They said she must have used something unnatural. She probably did. You wish she'd taught you how. There are quiet resistances too. The wife who waters down her husband's ale to keep him mild. The daughter who reads her brother's books when no one's watching. The widow who takes in orphans and tells them stories of brave queens who never existed. One mainstream fact: while most medieval women had limited rights, some found ways to resist their restrictions. They organized with other women, ran businesses, formed informal lending networks, or used literacy in the church to subtly assert agency. You find yourself doing it too, a sharp answer here, a refusal there. You start saying, "Not today," when someone asks for a favor that costs too much of your time. You start teaching your daughter things she isn't supposed to know, like how to tie a sling, how to count coins, how to bind a book. And your daughter? She's watching. Always watching. She sees the way you tilt your head when the bailiff lies. The way you look him in the eye even though you're not supposed to. The way you touch your herbs like they're holy. She sees you become more than what you were allowed to be. You don't wear rebellion on your sleeve. You stitch it quietly into hems, slip it into stews, bury it in garden rows with the chamomile. You start writing letters for the other village women who can't spell. You sign your name with pride. Historians still debate whether this sort of subtle resistance mattered. It didn't change laws, they say. It didn't overthrow kings, but you know better. You know that every quiet no, every clever workaround, every whispered lesson passed from mother to daughter, that's survival. That's rebellion in its own threadbare dress. Want a quirky detail? In some towns, women carved tiny messages into wooden spoon symbols or initials so they wouldn't be stolen at communal meals. Some of those spoons still exist. A silent archive of voices that history tried to forget. You start carving too, not a spoon, but a bit of bone, smooth, flat, just big enough to etch a few marks into the surface. Your name, your daughter's, A flower? A small sun? You hide it under the floorboards, not for anyone else, just for you. Just to say we were here. Sometimes late at night you whisper things into the fire. Not prayers, not confessions, just truths. The ones you can't say aloud in daylight. I hate this dress. I wanted to run. I was in love once before I ever married. I'm tired of being quiet. I matter. The fire listens. And in the silence that follows, you start to believe it. There is still danger. Of course. Speak too loudly, and the gossips rise. The church watches. The men frown. The world does not like a woman who remembers she has a spine, but you're no longer afraid of being seen. Because you've already been invisible, and that was worse. You are not a revolutionary, not yet, but you are a woman who has begun to resist. With your hands, with your words, with your very breath. And sometimes that's more than enough. It's early. The sky is the color of ash, and dew clings to the grass like tiny pearls. You step outside, pull your shawl tighter, and breathe in the damp, cool air. The world feels quiet, not just in sound, but in recognition. No one will sing your name. There are no statues, no portraits, no legacy carved in stone. And yet this world would fall apart without you. You begin your morning routine, feeding the animals, checking the stew, coaxing the fire to life. It's ordinary, thankless, necessary, like every day before, like every day after. But now you see it differently. You've lived through famine, plague, childbirth, heartbreak. You've delivered babies and buried them. You've whispered prayers, stitched defiance into seams, said yes when you wanted to scream, said no when it was dangerous. And though you were told your life meant less than a man's, less than a noble's, less than a priest, you've held up everything. One mainstream fact for all the wars, laws, and monarchs that fill the history books: the fabric of medieval society was sewn together by invisible labor overwhelmingly performed by women. Their hands churned butter, mended roads, raised children, cared for the sick, and planted the seeds of every harvest. Your hands, not some distant figure, yours. You once thought survival was about staying quiet. Now you know it was about staying alive through all of it. And you did. You're not a saint, you're not a legend, but you are a thread in a vast, stubborn tapestry, a web of women whose names have been lost, but whose labor endures. You light a candle at the church, not for salvation, just recognition, a soft flame for yourself, for the life you lived, for the work that no one else could see, but that held generations together. You touch your daughter's hair as she walks by, stronger now, sharper than you were at her age. You taught her things you weren't allowed to learn, and she will remember. She will carry it forward, because even if they never write it down, your legacy is woven into every child you raised, every meal you served, every woman you healed, every moment you endured and didn't let break you. One quirky tidbit to end. In some villages, when a woman died, her spindle or favorite cooking spoon was buried with her, not for practical use, but to symbolize the work she left behind, the mark she made. You smile at the thought. You'd like to choose your spoon. You've lived a life most would call small, but it was vast, because it was full, because you kept going, because you mattered, even when no one was watching. The fire has burned low now, casting soft shadows that dance across the walls like old memories. The air is warm with the weight of your journey, heavy but somehow soothing, like a blanket pulled up just beneath your chin. Let your eyes close slowly. Let your hands rest finally. You've done enough. You've walked miles through the fields of memory past smoke and song, through childbirth and mourning, under the silent gaze of stone chapels and starlit skies. You've lived 1,000 moments in the space of one story, and now it's time to lay them gently down. You were never just one thing, never just wife or mother or daughter. You were breath and blood and thought. You were the invisible strength holding up an entire world built to forget you. But you remember, and that's what matters. So breathe in deeply. Feel the ache in your bones ease. The soft hum of your heartbeat slow. Let your mind quiet. Let it unfurl like thread from a spindle, drifting gently through the dark. There's no judgment here. No weight left to carry. Just rest. The kind of rest earned by centuries of women before you who sang lullabies no one wrote down, whose hands wove blankets and destinies alike, whose stories now live softly in the firelight of memory. You are part of them, and they are part of you. Good night, dear listener. You've been seen. You've been heard. You've been held. Sleep well. End of script. Sweet dreams.